Really good. Everyone got a drink? Except for me, but I'll do that after. Great to be here. I think when Dan and I talked a little bit about this, he said one of the themes that he wanted to explore was how you can use data and how you can use research to help fuel your business, whether it's a small business, a new business, or a big business. And so he said, do you have anything to say about that? And I said, well, let me see what I can pull together. I've already had my day made or my evening made. This is not my year of birth, but it did actually start something in my life. I was in '87, I was at university, I was trying to get into business school, and my math marks were really shit. And so the only way I figured I'd get into business school was to start my own business, because that would look great on the resume. So I was in a whole bunch of different circumstances combined to force me or lead me into the clothing business, which I had no clue about. I didn't know how to sew, didn't know anything about fabric, didn't know about designers, but somehow I was designing beach shorts and beachwear. And in 1987, kind of launched this company called Osprey Reef. And back to that, I didn't know anything at that point in time. I was 18, and I thought, okay, I'll just go and launch this thing. And there's lots of examples about lots of people making tons of money in clothing, and I figured I would just go design it, tell people what I wanted, and go and sell it, and it would be, an instant success. Now, it did actually okay. Like I got to Canada-wide distribution, and it was fun kind of creating a line of clothing out of nothing, having not known how to do it before. It actually didn't get me into business school, because I decided I spent so much money on this company I couldn't actually afford business school anymore. So I just went from there, and that became my first kind of adventure. And as I go through this, you'll hopefully start to see a bit of a theme. But when I ran this for 3 years, learned a ton, learned a lot about fabric and designers and how to pull it all together. I did learn how to sew on a button as well, and to this day I still know how to do that. It was an interesting start. So just go do it and then figure it out from there was kind of the model I started. So when at the end I decided to shut down the business, having basically broken even, and if you break even, you don't have any money left, the next obvious thing to do is to start up a charity. So that's what I did in 1991. Anyone know the significance of 1991? You guys have to work for the beer.
Desert Storm.
Desert Storm? So a different kind of storm, more Canadian storm. So Canada was going to break apart. Remember that story? Once upon a time. Quebec was sort of deciding whether they wanted to split off from Canada. And I noticed that there wasn't a lot of young people getting into the discussion. So I kind of posed a question like, how would you get young people involved in determining where Canada's future is? Again, I kind of had an opinion about that, but one of the first things that I did, which I did differently this time, is I brought in a whole bunch of young people from across Canada. So this was the first group, 40 of them. Created the organization. It was a charity called Generation 2000. And the goal was to get to every high school in Canada by the year 2000. And we actually got to a third of the high schools in Canada in 4 years. And one of the amazing things that we learned in this, as we got it going, is we need to create a program that was going to go into high schools. And almost back to the Osprey Reef story, I figured the right way to do it was just to hire an expert and get them to create the program, and then we would just go and take that on the road. So I hired an expert, brought all these people in, these exact people, to Toronto, and we were sitting in a hotel down there, and these expert directors and writers came in to present the program that we were going to take across Canada. And everyone sat in the room, they did their show, and at the end of this presentation, after literally flying all these people in, getting ready to go on a 4-month tour across Canada to high schools, there was stunned silence in the room. Basically everyone thought it was shit. And we had no program. We had schools booked for the next 4 months who were expecting us to be in there. Luckily, one of these guys was, none of them were actors, none of them were producers, none of them were really writers, but there was one person there who was involved in the theater business. And he said, why don't we just come together and build it? Because this group was all kind of in their early 20s. They just finished high school. They kind of knew what was going to work in high school. And they actually built the program. It turned out to be incredibly successful. And, one of the things that we knew is we had 40 people who kind of represented the entire country who were there to create this great idea. Okay, so then the end broke up with my girlfriend. The federal government stopped giving us money, and so did a whole bunch of other people, and we had to decide what we were going to do next. And so again, if you have no money and you don't know what to do next, the next thing you do is go on a holiday. So I leased a car and I drove. That's the pattern. So, and right about here, in 1994, I actually sent a note to a friend, we were talking about this today, on email, which was kind of new back in 1994. I sent an email back to a friend and said, for the last year or so as we crisscrossed the country with Generation 2000, I had governments, I had banks, I had charities, I had big companies all asking me about this Generation X. Is anyone in Generation X here? Anyone want to admit it? No. Dan is, but we won't. Oh-ish. Interesting. Okay. So what had happened over a few years is we talked to so many young people across Canada that everyone was starting to look to us as the experts on what was going on with this younger generation. So I sent a note back to my friend Andy and said, there's so many amazing people. There's also, the other thing I did is, long drive, no Apple Music at that time, lots of CDs, as many CDs as I could pack in the back of my car, and a 5 CD changer. But I listened to a lot of talk radio. And one of the things about talk radio in the US is that they kind of get a topic and they just go at it over and over and over again. And one of the favorite topics on my drive was the disillusionment of that younger generation. How they're entitled, how they're lazy, how they, basically the world is going to end because that generation is coming up. And I thought to myself, that's not the generation I met crisscrossing Canada. And a friend of mine said, Andy, that's not the kind of generation that he knew. And so that email turned into the next business called Decode, which actually is still my business today. So we had another founder who was doing this charity thing and learning about young people in Canada, and we had a magazine publisher and a graphic designer. So that was the 3 people that started the company. One of the first things that we did, back to the clothing company, the way I started it was basically just think I knew everything and I would run in and I would just do it, and then everyone was going to buy all these clothes. Second one, I had learned this really interesting, lesson, which was if you know who you're trying to connect with and you bring them in and you ask them to create something, it's amazing what they can do, because they have so much inherent knowledge of who they're talking to. So those 40 people created Generation 2000 based on that one mistake I made, which was to hire someone I thought was an expert who really didn't consult with any of the target when they created that play or that program that we were taking across Canada. And I kind of used all of that and said, what if you could bring together groups of, and at that time it was Generation X, groups of really incredible Generation X to help people solve problems. So that was the model for Decode. And we had $9,000 to start with. Our first project was with the United Way, and their question was, how do we get young people involved in volunteering in Toronto? And so we said, well, we should probably bring in young people who might want to volunteer in Toronto, and we'll help solve the problem. And they said, wow, that's a great idea. It's funny how that was 20 years ago. I still walk into boardrooms today and say the same thing. They say, we need to get young people to, buy our banking products. And I say, why don't we bring in a bunch of young people to help you understand and build new bank products? And they go, that's an amazing idea. So that's what we did. Then we went from building that to developing a new deodorant for young men for Colgate-Palmolive to then working with RBC to help them design a recruitment program for the bank. And one of the, but the same talk happened in each one of these cases, which is, let's bring in a group of your ideal customer and we'll help them create the program. Let's bring in some young men to help create a new deodorant. Let's bring in some young people who are looking for jobs and help you build your recruitment strategy. Seems so obvious, right? So why doesn't anyone do it? It's amazing. I don't know. So we kept going. Then we started doing some research in the Globe and Mail, wrote an article about this new Generation X and what was really going on in Canada. And then I had a book agent call and say, that article could be a book, no problem, and you guys should write a book. And we said, okay, let's write a book. And so we wrote a book, almost 20 years ago on Generation X, and that led us to more things. And fast forward to 2010, and we basically worked with companies now all around the world. And we've expanded our business, and we've done all kinds of different things, and really it comes down to how do you generate insights about a younger generation with that generation, and then how do you generate new ideas and innovation in order to have an impact. So that's the basic model to 2010. With me so far? You are allowed to ask questions at some point, even now if you want. What I thought I'd do is run through this quickly, and then we'll get into some more stuff. Good? Look at Dan for the yes, so that's okay. Keep going. Okay. 2012. So I've been running Decode now for almost 17 years or so. The same model over and over again. Moved over to England, was setting up Decode in England, so we were working with clients there. They had, funny enough, they have young people in England too. They have the same problems and same meetings happen in the same boardroom. So let's get together with this younger generation and help them solve your problem, if that's what your problem is. But I was on the London Eye. I'm not sure it was, but anyway, let's use it for today. So, and I'm thinking, we know so much about this younger generation, but they're just, and there's lots of governments, there's lots of companies, lots of NGOs who are interested in connecting with it, but there just seems to be something that's bigger out there that we could work on. And just a day in 2012, I just read an article that The Economist put out, which was their brand new Livable Cities Index. And anyone's heard of the most livable cities in the world? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's actually right here. So they put up this Livable Cities Index. It's pretty detailed as far as who's doing what. Not very detailed on how they did it, but that's another story. I probably thought about it because I think Toronto did reasonably well. I think this is the second year they did it, but Toronto did reasonably well, so that kind of interested me because I was from Toronto, and London did really well, so I was living in London at the time. But I remember I'd been doing this for now 17 years, and you can add Generation 2000 onto that. When I looked at this, it seemed interesting for people who might be economists living in cities. But I thought about all the work that I'd done with younger generations over the years, and I thought the things they measure really don't matter that much to young people. So I thought there's got to be something in here, like how do youth and young adults, how do they actually think about cities? How would they rank cities? Okay, so from there I went to find the best pizza in the world. So what's your favorite pizza place in the world? Chicago?
Windsor.
I've never had that answer before. Ever.
It's the only thing they have.
Nice.
They've got the
I'd say there's some.
We look at it with envy.
I'd say
That's how bad
there's
it
some
is.
pretty cool pizza places that are opened up here.
Here?
In
the
Toronto.
world.
And well, yeah.
I think this is the best
You guys
Well,
are
not
awesome.
necessarily in the world, but like in Canada, probably
Okay.
we have the best pizza. But in the world,
Just in Canada.
you know what? Italy, I've been to Italy before a couple times, and I'm not fazed by their pizza when I go there.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the Italian food, but the pizza, you can get just as good pizza here as you can in Italy.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the best pizza in the world?
I think so.
Where do you find the best pizza in the world? Montreal.
Montreal.
Where?
Lactose intolerant.
Where?
I said I'm lactose intolerant.
Or you do have pizza that doesn't have cheese on it now.
Yeah, but there's no way that can be in the conversation.
How many people eat pizza in the room? Is that how many people do not eat pizza in the room? 3. Okay. 4.
Not out of choice.
So as far as how do you know what the best pizza in the world is? Like what are you using for your pizza choice?
Taste of like all the ingredients in it, some good thick crust.
Yeah.
So thick crust. You said Chicago, right? They're known for their thick crust,
Thin.
and you like the thin.
Yeah, I like the thin.
You like how many people like thin? Thin and thick. The people who said they don't eat pizza, you can't vote, obviously. What else? How do you know what's really good pizza?
Quality ingredients,
Like what? Like how do you know it's a quality ingredient?
fresh ingredients,
Yeah. Okay.
flavor. I mean, some vegetables when they're organic and come from one part of the city versus different country, they taste different.
Nice.
Perhaps the way it's cooked,
Yeah.
the way it's baked.
cooked.
Yeah.
The way the cheese clings to the other pieces when you pull it apart.
Could be.
Yes.
So, turns out this pizza is from Napoli, and it is the best pizza in the world, according to me. And I really wasn't in search of the best pizza in the world, but it turns out I found it almost by mistake. And I'll come back to the pizza discussion in a second. But I actually went to when I was in London, I came across 2 incredible stats. One is that 50% of the world's population now lives in cities, which, since we're all in Toronto and probably most people we know live in cities, isn't really a surprise to us, but around the planet, that's a fairly big deal. The more surprising one to most people is that half the population of the world is under 30. And when you combine these two, you'd say, well, if 50% of the population lives in cities and half the population are under 30, then you gotta think that the population under 30 living in cities is a pretty interesting group to get to know. In fact, if you want to know where the future of the world is going, that's where it is. So there must be huge corporations that are built around this idea that young people living in cities is really all about the future, so you want to be right at the center at it. The answer is no, there isn't. In fact, there's very little information about youth in cities. There's 215 city indexes that have been built. The livable cities is just one. And as you'll see in a second, there's now, as we went through, not one of those city indexes was built around a vision of cities from a younger generation. So 215 built on all kinds of stuff, but not one was built on what young people think of cities. So I went to the World Urban Forum in Naples, and they literally, this is apologies to the 4 who don't eat pizza, but how many people have been to a conference where literally as you go out for your break, they have portable pizza ovens at the conference, and they serve you fresh pizza. And it's like a sourdough kind of pizza, and it's got a chewy, it's amazing. Amazing pizza. I know you weren't keen on Italian pizza, but I tell you,
I love Italian
you were in the
pizza.
wrong place, obviously. I'm just kidding you. So we, at that conference, launched Youthful Cities. And what took all the kind of knowledge from Decode, and we launched Youthful Cities to help cities attract and engage the now millennial generation, because the generation shifted over, and it used to, Generation X was the young generation when we got started. Now it's the, older generation, and now millennials, they're getting older 1 year every year as well, and so there's going to be another generation coming up after. But we also launched the first index which ranks cities around the world. I think I have Here it is. So this was the first one. We have a second one, but so how do you, in order to rank a city, turns out to be a pretty difficult thing because you have to be able to compare things. Remember back to Generation 2000, even the world that we created at Decode. One of the things that I learned right off the bat is if you want to do it, you have to bring people in where it really matters. So we literally recruited young people from around the world in cities to say, how do you build measurements to see where the best cities in the world were? And we said, well, it's got to be like things like number of kilometers of bike paths really matter. Our 3 people that we were working with in Africa said, well, that's great if there was any bike paths in any of the cities in Africa. So if you use that, you know that none of the African cities are going to rate very well. But green space, actually, they do have a fair amount of green space in some of those cities. And so that is something that we can look at. Employment, yeah, you can look at that. How do you build an affordability measure that actually works in every city around the world for young people? That turned out to be an interesting one where, the price of a pair of sneakers works everywhere in the world, but certain prices of food don't if they don't actually consume the food. But we had to learn all that by getting all those people in the room. And in the first year, I don't know if you can see in the back, but the number 1 city in the world in our first index was in Toronto. Now that did cause a little problem with the media because we happened to be based in Toronto and they thought that we were hired by the city of Toronto to promote the score. Luckily though, the Financial Times got hold of the index and they said, this is great. They put it through all their tests to make sure, and they said, we'll launch it. We'll launch it for you and we'll launch it around the world. So that was amazing. This is where I'm going to need your help for a second. And then it was time to retire. Should we toggle it? Okay.
Hopefully there's sound.
There may not be sound, but I can tell you what the sound is if it doesn't work. I didn't have time to test it.
Wow.
Do you guys know this guy?
Jimmy Kimmel.
Jimmy
Is there
Kimmel.
sound on the TV? So
The lover.
There's a question in the back while we deal with the technology.
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering, besides the questioning of your index because you were based in Toronto at the time, did anybody dig further and explain how you arrived at your answers by going through your methodology?
Yeah, we figured that everyone would hammer us harder than all the other 215 indexes because we were perceived as youth. So they would. So we had an academic advisory board. We built a scoring system that was really rigorous based on a bunch of how other people did it. We had in our first year we had 80 different indicators, and the example for the economists, they had 40. So we had double the number of indicators than what the economists had for their index. We also collected everything locally as opposed to in an office in London. So we had local people doing the collection. We had, and on and on and on. Happy to talk some more. But yeah, people asked us those kind of questions. And what's funny is you look at the reports on other indexes and they don't ask any of those questions. They just assume that it's been done because it was done by a consulting firm or something, that it must be right. But for ours, there was lots of questions.
Well done. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was crazy to do this, and we kind of started in 2013 and launched this in actually we started really going at it early January 2013, and the index was built and we launched it November 20th of that same year, and then I think it was the 23rd we had this guy. But yes.
Sorry, just before that.
Yeah.
Can you explain, because I know about it.
Yeah.
Can you explain to them what it takes to build an index? The
Sure.
process very.
I'm skipping forward just to make sure.
Yeah, the amount of data points.
So I mentioned that we have indicators. So the price of sneakers. How do we have to look for the cost of a basic pair of sneakers, and we literally had to get down to the detail of exactly what kind of sneakers are we pricing out. Are we pricing out Stan Smiths around the world? Because that's a shoe that basically Adidas sells everywhere in the world, and we can price that everywhere. We actually we have something called the last call index, which what time do the bars close? And so you have to go to every city around the world. Luckily, we have people in every city, and you have to figure out what's the last call. So that becomes another point of data. Now, if bars close at 2 here, and there was lots of cities that don't have a last call at all, I can list all those for you if you'd like later for your travel. So then you have to, it's getting into the science of it, but then you have to say, we even have the hours of operation of transit. There's only about 3 cities in the world that really run their full transit 24/7. New York is one of them, and London isn't. So London closes down from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. every night. So they got 21 points. New York gets 24 points. So each one of those, turns out we have now 101. Each one of those indicators, we have to get the data. We have to make sure we get it in every single city. We have to source it in case someone asks us, where did you get that piece of data? And then we have to actually index it so that, New York got 24 points for the transit, London got 21 points, Toronto really shit because it's closed. It opens up at 9 a.m. on Saturdays. It probably got about 12 points. And so New York 24, Toronto 12. So that's, there's the gap. And then we assign points. So it gets really technical in a way, but we want to use that data to give a very clear and confident ranking of what the best cities in the world are from a youth perspective.
Is there a population cutoff for certain cities?
So our age range, there is. Sorry, the age range we use is 15 to 29. That was the age range we looked at. But you're saying the smallest city that we have, I think, is it's a small city. Anyway, it's around 2 or 3 million.
So they're substantial sized cities. You're not going to look at Halifax, for instance.
No,
it's too small.
Well, we are now, but not in the beginning.
Yeah.
So we said, let's go after, the first year was the 25 biggest, so the 5 biggest cities in the world in each region. And then we said, let's go to the 10 biggest cities in the world in each region, which was our second one. And then eventually we're going to 100 cities around the world that are still the biggest cities in the world. And they're just the most complex cities. They're the most interesting. If you look, and in fact, fast forward 20 years, and those 100 cities will be 1 billion people. So it's 1/8 of the population of the planet will be in 100 cities. So that's kind of where we were going.
Wow.
Okay, this is my retirement.
Sorry if it's really loud.
So we'll see if it works.
On the subject of Toronto, a new annual report called the Youthful Cities Index, which compares all the world's major cities, has determined that Toronto is the world's most youthful city. They judge the cities on 4 main criteria: diversity, entertainment options, public spaces, and does your mayor smoke crack? Berlin was the second most youthful city. New York came in third, and the world's oldest city, the world's least youthful city, for the 5th year in a row, Metamucilton, Illinois. LA was the 8th most youthful city. We may not be the most youthful city. We definitely have the most paralyzed foreheads here.
So
I know.
a couple of cool things about that. One, the PR firm we were working with said, that's a cool video too, but we'll play it after. Thank you. So a couple of fun things is none of us knew that was going to be on. So I got all these calls at about 11:30 at night on the night that it went, saying I just didn't happen to see it, but luckily it was on. The PR firm said they could retire because it's like to get on Jimmy Kimmel and have him say youthful city 6 times in 45 seconds. They said every one of their clients can't know that they're working for us because they would have expectations that were beyond reality. But the cool thing about youthful cities is that everyone wanted to talk about it. So we got media around the world, not just Jimmy Kimmel. So we had, there's a quick selection of the paper. So all the British papers picked it up, and a bunch of the U.S. Papers and media outlets picked it up. We still haven't got CNN, but there's always something in the future. They elected Trump, so now we're not as keen on going to going to CNN. But what I love, not it's like it's cool we got lots of media, it's cool we got on Jimmy Kimmel, but it comes back to the original premise. Because we worked so hard and so many people around the world worked so hard to collect all that data, and it was good data, it also made for a really good story, and it was a very defensible story. So we knew we were going to have great impact. So here's kind of the arc. It goes from, remember back to those beach shorts. I know what I'm doing, I'll do it, I'll figure it out, and I'll just sell it to them, and I'm sure they're gonna buy it. So that's where we started, or I started. And then all of a sudden, over here, took me a few years to get there, but over here, it's let's gather as many people as we can. Let's use all these data resources that already exist. Let's collect it all together. Let's map out the world from a younger generation perspective, urban kind of perspective, launch a brand new index. We've now done a survey of 15,000 young people around the world who live in cities. We've run a global summit as well, and then we also are running these innovation networks in cities, all with that premise of getting them involved so that they can create new solutions. Yeah.
So a lot of what I'm hearing like you do, which is bring in the user group, basically, ask them what they think, relates a lot to what I do in the tech world, usability testing. We do that a lot, and lots of companies build that into how they plan out their product. So as more and more tech companies have entered the space and it's become more common, have you seen the mindset sort of change? Because you said, people were shocked to hear, oh, let's bring the actual user group to come in and talk about it. So has that sort of evolved at all?
You are leading me so nicely into what's next. Okay,
Great.
So here is what's next. Everyone knows there's two sides of the brain. And like the left-hand side is the analytical kind of data-driven side, and the right-hand side is your creative side, which actually switches over if you're left-handed or something like that. But we'll go through that later. So you had an interesting point, which is we've kind of been doing this all the time, right? We bring in these users, we see we've already got the stuff, we test them, and they say, do they like it or not? We watch their eyes go across the screen, and we do all that kind of stuff. So in that model, what I would be doing would be, I'm going to go build this index by myself, or I'm going to go build my beach shorts by myself, and I'm going to go and lay them on the table for all of you after I've spent years building it, and I'm going to ask you, do you like the beach shorts? Do they fit you? Or I would bring you all in and say, I'm thinking of designing beach shorts. What do you like about beach shorts? What do you like about pizza? So it's the reason that everyone's surprised at it is because they always ended up developing it because they think they know what it is right,
and then
testing the shit out of it and hoping that they don't mess up. They didn't mess up, which is incredibly expensive, doesn't work all the time, and and that's kind of why it's the opposite way. So if you're only in this side of the brain, you really, and the other I've got a slide kind of talk about this and from a data standpoint, but in the testing world, you generally ask people what they think, which only uses this side of the brain. If you ask them to create an answer to a question or create a solution, they use the other side, and they don't always give you the same answer.
What do you find is more reliable in terms of product development, the analytical side or the creative side?
Well, it's both, because we all have both sides of the brain. And that's what I've always found. And in some ways, when we started Decode, we focused more on this side, and we rejected the analytical side. But as kind of Youthful Cities shows, it was very, very data heavy, but the way we built it was in fact incredibly qualitative. Like we went and recruited real people on the ground, we trained them how to do it, we had these discussions about how we're going to measure it, and it was a kind of user-driven build from the very beginning. And so when it launched, it all made sense. And that's one of the features of the work that I do, and also obviously fundamentally believe in, is if you're accessing both sides of the brain, that really is building true knowledge. If you just spend your time on one side, you're only getting half of the story. Which is, how are we doing for time? You tell me when I need to speed up or slow down. because I want to, please ask questions as we're going, because I've got lots of stuff on here we could talk about, but I'd rather talk about what you want to talk about. Yeah.
What sort of language barriers did you run into and how did you address them?
They were, I think we did, the first year we were running in 12 languages. We addressed them in a reasonably simple way, was we only recruited people who could speak English plus whatever other language, so they converse with us in English, and then they would do their research in their home language, and as long as we had that dialogue, I wouldn't say it was perfect, because some people's English is better than others, but it was good enough, and it's an international enough language that we could figure things out. But even currency discussions, we had to figure all that stuff out as well. But I think we're now in 40 languages, so it's those biggest cities in the world are spread across the world, so you have to deal with all. When we did our survey, we did it in the home language, so it's all done, and then it's luckily the questions were translated, so as long as we had the translation right, again, we worked with local people to make sure that we were discussing each of the questions to make sure the translation was right. The answer is still going to be a number, and we can compare Addis Ababa and Atlanta if we want, because we have the same question asked just in 2 different languages, but the answers can be matched up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How did you decide the important data points? Like you said, sneakers, the price of sneakers was important. That was by interviewing.
Yeah.
And how many people do you need to interview to know that your data is accurate? Like there's 1 million young people.
Yeah, more than that.
100,000?
Which
I mean, from one city.
3 billion now, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyone take stats in school? How many? Just nodding, yes, a few of them. So that's actually, you're better than me, because I didn't take stats in school. But you don't need to interview the entire population to get a sense of it. Now, there's lots of debate about that in the US right now because of what happened in the election, but the fundamentals of reason, I think there's other reasons why that didn't
Trump
work.
Nation.
The answer is it depends. So it depends on a number of different factors and the kinds of decisions you want to make. You can interview 50 people, and as long as they're somewhat randomly selected and you ask them the same question, you can actually get a good sense of what an entire population might think, but you might be off by 20% at that level. So back to your stats class. There's sort of magic numbers in research which says that if you can get to 500 that randomly, that's actually a plus or minus 3 or 4%, and that's pretty good on getting answers to things. There are many companies around the world who do one focus group and build multi-million-dollar campaigns around what one person in one focus group said, and they may or may not make any money based on that, but they still make those decisions. So it really depends on how you're doing it. Why don't I run through a couple of the classic research? That's one of them. A couple of the classic kind of research conundrums that I've been through and other people have been through, and then jump in with more questions. One of the ways I do it is get you to think about the last trip you took for pleasure. So your last holiday, where'd you go? Iceland. Boston. Who said? Okay, we'll use you for. Well, where else did you guys go? Nepal. Vegas.
Mexico.
It's a well-traveled bunch. Sounds like a lot of fun. So, how did you choose those locations?
Distance.
Distance?
We drove.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
How do you choose? You did lots of. So there's a circle that would say that Boston is 8.5 hours. So why didn't you go to some other city that was 8.5 hours?
We did Chicago the year before. We wanted to go to a major city where we wouldn't be spending crazy amount of money like New York per se.
Okay.
We wanted to go somewhere American. We wanted to go somewhere with a substantial population.
And how did you find out that Boston would meet all those criteria?
Well, one of the guys had been.
Okay.
But we also did our research in terms of reading articles. I was the food guy. I was reading everything that had to do with food.
Sure. Okay.
We had one guy who was in charge of sporting events. There was another guy who was in charge of nightlife.
Great.
And it was a divide and conquer kind of thing.
Okay. Iceland? You're Iceland, sorry.
Yeah, we were flying back to Canada, so we thought Iceland aired as a cool layover, so
do,
we always
yeah.
wanted to go. And they let us take an extra bag if we flew Iceland Air, so.
Nice. And how long did you stay in Iceland?
4 days.
And how did you, like, did
The
you
Blue
stay?
Lagoon.
Where'd you stay?
Airbnb in Reykjavik and rented a car.
And on Airbnb, how did you decide whether the one you were choosing was good or not?
Reviews, cheapest, didn't care about size. So
Okay.
we were only going for 4 days.
And we can talk about this more. That what I like about the last trip is it's actually a great example of the two sides of the brain in research. So when you go on Airbnb and you're looking at rating, what is that? That's quantitative research. It's all here, right? It's a whole bunch of people saying it's a 3, 4, 5, 2. When you're looking to Boston, you've got someone who's been there, so that's local knowledge. That's actually over here. You're talking to friends, you're getting recommendations, you're thinking about it. So and we do that all the time. We're constantly grabbing, top 10 lists, we're grabbing quantitative data, and we're making decisions based on that. But we're also really listening to what our friends think, what our friends like, what our friends are suggesting, which is much more on the qualitative. It's, one's about in a sense, a fact, and the other one is about a story. You get a fact, which is this is a 4.3, and then you flip over and you say, let's read the review of the person who rated it F2 or F7, and you get, the story. And those, some people like more stories, some people like more facts, but we all use those all the time. And that's, back to the what's a perfect way to do research is it's like planning a trip. It actually works so much better when you pull these two things together than if you try to do one or the other. And in companies that just do quantitative research as the way they do it, they just miss all the nuances of the language, and they miss all the stories that can give them new ideas. Similarity, if you only do this, even there's Nike is a classic that doesn't spend a lot on quantitative research. But in a sense they do, because what they do is they do a whole bunch of different things, and they throw them all in the market, and then they find out who buys it and how many they sell, and then they cut things that it doesn't sell, which is another way of doing real-time quantitative research. There it is. I'm just gonna flip into, that's a big one. Qualitative research does not equal focus groups. I've been in companies that have a line item on their budget that says focus groups, which is, it really is, it can be an okay way to do research, qualitative research, but it's generally pretty bad. And there's so many problems. You have to really understand how to run a focus group and the limitations of it. But companies, especially consumer-focused companies, do a ton of focus groups as a way to convince themselves that the strategy they've picked is the right strategy. This is my really basic method of building a research strategy. So why are you doing the research in the first place? Sometimes people forget this one. They just say, well, just go and research the population. Spend a lot of time on who you're talking to. Seems obvious, but back to the boardroom table, we should get this generation in to help you solve the problem. It's funny how many people spend no time on the who and just jump into what do you want to ask in the questionnaire. And then, how do you want to do it? That could be on both sides. And then there actually could be issues around the timing of it. If you ask someone right now, are you interested in politics? Well, yeah, of course I'm interested in politics, but ask them a year from now, you might get a different answer. So the timing of your research really can impact it. It also depends on how much money you've got and where you're at in the cycle. Got tons of money, you can survey 10, 15,000 people if you want to spend your money that way. But I think just what we did here today, if I want to start up a pizza joint, what did I learn in maybe 2.5 minutes of asking people what their favorite pizza was? You don't need a lot of money to do research. I can also jump online and I can find out everything I want to know about other studies that other people have done on research on pizza, and you can build an enormous amount of knowledge with very little money that will get you most of the way. Just bringing in a group of people to talk about the issue or the idea you've got or the challenge you have, that would be somewhat like people call a focus group. But it really is more of a dialogue that you're having with your end customer or, potential, consumer, if that's what you're looking at. And that at the front end, the more you do that at the front end, the more you're going to learn, so that you can, in fact, if you need to, go and ask people more quantitatively to test something out. So I'll flip through these quickly and then ask me the questions you want to ask. So tons of bias in research. I already told you I love Napoli pizza. So everything you were saying, like thick crust, I want to do that, because I like the thin crust. What I like to do is start where you are and understand what your biases are. So are you a normal person? I know that's a crazy thing to ask, but that's the first step in knowing whether you can do, how you're going to react to different kinds of research. Because no one in this room is normal, right? You guys all know that? Not in a negative way. But you're not average, is what. If you want to do certain kinds of research, you may want to get an average perspective. And you can really bias yourself by the way that you think about certain problems, because you have potential bias. There's also a lot of biases in every single methodology out there, from quantitative research to qualitative research. So I spend a lot of time just thinking about, how is the work that we're going to do, where are the biases, and how do we mitigate that? One of the ways we dealt with that at Youthful Cities when we did our survey is we hired people locally to go and collect the data locally. Other companies might have hired a global firm and just had them kind of go in and grab databases from different countries and do it all centrally. We said that actually creates a bias, which means if the company's in the US or the company's in the UK, that they might have a bias around that when they're selecting samples and doing other things. So we went local and said that's one way we want to mitigate the bias. So that's just a quick example. We actually talked about the design versus test challenge. Is if you really want to design something, you tend to start much more on the qualitative and what I would call secondary research, which is just find out what else is out there in order for you to help in the design. So the more you bring in your end customer, the more you learn from other things out there, the better off you are in the design process. Once you've designed it, again, big companies need to test things to make sure they're going to be successful, even though most studies say that those tests aren't necessarily conclusive. But this tends to be much more of that quantitative research in order for you to test something. I've been in small company. I've been in lots of cases where you still have an idea, you bring in a group of people, and as long as you have a good, honest discussion about it and you're taking great notes, that can work in helping you get to the next stage of launching something. Another classic challenge people do when they're launching something new is they ask people about what they might do in the future. Do you think that you would go to a pizza place that was all Napoli's pizza, that was sourdough, and had fresh ingredients and amazing gooey cheese when you pulled it up? You think you would go to that? Anyone? Yeah? Okay. So, did you go to a pizza spot yesterday? Anyone? Did anyone go to pizza yesterday? One, sort of.
Home baked.
You did a home baked
Yeah.
pizza yesterday.
The day before yesterday.
Day before. So if I stretch it out to the last 2 days, instead, did you eat pizza in the last week? How many people ate pizza in the last week? Okay. So that's a fact. You actually did that, right? I asked you whether you were going to come to my shop, and it sounded really good. And of course, why wouldn't you say, yeah, that sounds really good? So this is did you go last week is an actual fact that you're asking about. Are you going to go in the future are you going to be a millionaire in the next 2 years? Well, maybe everyone thinks they will be, but we won't know until we get there. This one that we want to talk about. It is and maybe I'll stop here and just make sure that and see what questions we got. But this is the theme that I'm most passionate about, and I think for me, right back to that charity that I started and that kind of learning is we actually brought people in from all across Canada. We had so many different cultures that were involved in that group of 40. We had a little bit of an age range from those who were 18 to those who were, you know, in their mid 20s. The diversity of perspective we had, you know, some of them, we had that one actor, but we had people who were doing all kinds of different things. And when they came together to create that program, the creativity was incredible. But they were also kind of representative of the people and the perspectives and kind of places that we were going to go to. So that's why that program worked. And using that, every time I try to create something, I use that co-creation model. Why wouldn't you bring together back to even those early projects at Decode? The other funny conversation we have is, I'll use the Colgate Palmolive. Like we're developing deodorant for young men. The first thing that blew their mind is we said we should bring in young women into the creation group. We never do that. Like, we only do focus groups with young men to see if they like the products. And I say, well, aren't women involved in the sort of process of how men smell or think they smell? Like, wouldn't you do that? And you know, everyone on our side thought that was obvious, but that was revolutionary to them, that you'd bring women into this process. So that was number one. The next thing we did, because again, kind of like that clothing company, we didn't really know what we were doing, is we said, well, of course, you'll join us in the innovation process, right? And they said, well, we're usually behind the glass, like kind of looking at what people are saying. And we're saying, well, but don't you have to launch this thing? Like, don't you know a lot about deodorant? Like, wouldn't you be an asset in the meeting or in the session? And so they said, okay, well, we'll come along. And I'm still friends with my client of 20 years ago. And every time I see him, we often harken back to that very first time. He said that was still one of the best sessions I ever did in my entire consumer products history, because he learned so much. And when he walked back in to do the pitch for these new products, he felt like he was going to be successful. He felt like it wasn't about testing whether they liked it or not. He said, they actually created these products. I know they're going to want it. Mm-hmm. And the testing worked out. They spent a lot less money on testing because they actually had the confidence at the front end of the process. So they didn't have to waste money at the back end of the process. And I think it's my next slide, but diversity builds better ideas. Like it has worked over and over and over again for me, right up to that Youthful Cities. Not that just getting on Jimmy Kimmel was the goal, but really the goal was, how do you revolutionize cities from that youth perspective? So that's one thing that you can use in your work. That would be great. Yeah.
Just sorry, I keep on butting it just because I know the knowledge base that's in your head.
I'm here till midnight. If you want me here till midnight, I can stay till midnight.
Can you, two things. One, how do cities use the data now? Which I think goes back to the whole data-driven innovation. What do cities do with the data that you found? And number two, if it's not too much of a secret, if you can talk about the methodology of the research, for example, like the ones you use for Nike. And I don't think everyone's going to use it, but if you scale it down, you can actually use it in your for-profit or not-for-profits or whatever on a smaller scale. It's just the interviews and people interviewing other people, etc. I think
that one.
Yeah, that and this.
And the other one.
Yeah. That and the other one.
So one of the methodologies we created at Decode, it's always seems so funny to talk about it, but early on, what we decided to do was we were starting in whatever I said, 1996 or 98 or something, 96 I think it was. So the internet was just kind of coming on stream, and we thought these online discussion boards were kind of interesting and we could be useful. So we just wanted to test out new technology and see if we could have a different kind of dialogue. And in order to do that, we literally had to rent laptop computers, ship them out to people across Canada, and the computer had to come with a plug-in modem. We had to teach them how to use that, and then they could get online and start to dialogue with one another. So still today, we do a lot of stuff on online dialogues, but we've literally been doing it for 20 years because we tried out some new technology to see if we could experiment with it as a way to learn more. That's on the technology front. On the other side is we use a very human approach, which is we go out and find this sort of, if we want to look at a Nike or an athletic company, for example, we go and find people who are really interested in, let's call it basketball. So they're really interested in basketball. They happen to be, let's say they're 18 to 24 years old. They're interested in basketball, and they've got something else that kind of makes them an interesting person. And then we train them as investigators. So as opposed to going to a research firm and saying, can you research 18 to 24-year-old basketball players in Toronto? We go to the 18 to 24-year-old basketball players and we train them as researchers. And then we say, go and find 5 or 10 people who play basketball in Toronto, you might know through your expanded social networks. And we'd like you to interview them for, say, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. And we'll give you the interview guide. We'll show you how to fill it in. Now you can fill it in online. You can do it on your phone. You can do all those kinds of things. But the nice thing is that it's basketball player talking to basketball player. And the conversations you can have in that peer-to-peer approach are a much deeper conversation than if some technically very strong researcher comes in and asks you the same 30 minutes of questions, because they just don't know exactly the language to use. They're not going to feel comfortable, and they just won't get the depth. So by going right to the source and saying, let's go to the customer and make them the researcher, it's worked out incredibly well for us. And it's a very human approach. Then the other thing that we do is you take all those researchers, or we call them decoders, and you bring them together for a discussion with the client. So now they've gone out and interviewed, say, 5 or 10 people. One of the problems with focus groups, we've got 7 or 8 people sitting around a table and they all have an opinion. When we brought our 7 or 8 people, we don't use a table, but we sit around in a casual atmosphere, kind of like, maybe kind of like this. They've now interviewed, 5 or 10 people, and when we ask them a question, they don't have to rely on just their opinion. They now have this knowledge about, it's much, much broader. So the depth, again, you can get into. So the combination of starting with the source, training them, in some ways it's good for them too. They learn kind of basic research techniques. It just goes a lot deeper. Yeah.
So what are your favorite tools for data aggregation and analysis?
It's a good question. It probably depends on the data. For Youthful Cities, the aggregation is just one kind of crazy Google Sheets, like Google spreadsheet with a lot of other sheets and all pulling things together, because we had to create a scoring system. So, and we were launching it, so it was done on the cheap, and luckily Google's free, so that was pretty cheap. On an analysis, we're now toying around with a bunch of new, it depends on, there's again lots of different types of analysis. We were using basically human analysis as opposed to technology to do most of it. But we're now we're using more visualization tools. We're looking into different ways to visualize the data, which will help us analyze it better. So there's a new platform, well, I'm not sure how new it is, but the one that we're using called Cabana. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. So we're just playing around with that just to see if we can kind of paint pictures of the data so that we can learn and just see if we can come up with new directions.
But really it's like a human thinking engine that analyzes the data. You don't put it through an analytics program or... We
do to test the credibility of the data. So we have data scientists who kind of runs a bunch of tests, and it allows us to, in Youthful Cities, we actually ran, on the survey we did, we ran the data to find out whether it was credible or not, because we were collecting it all locally. And an example there was a city in South Asian city where we collected a lot of data, and in the data or in the questionnaire we just asked how important are things like safety and health and transit and employment and music and film. Like we have a list of 20 things that we asked people about their city, and in this city they rated everything at a 9 or above as important. And when we didn't actually see that the first time, but when you run the analysis, you realize that there wasn't another city in the world that did that. And so, running a consistency kind of check on the data meant that, we couldn't trust the data. It wasn't that they were just really positive and they thought everything was important. It as you got into it, you found out that the rest of the data was flawed as well. And then, someone probably just figured they would just get people to, click and fill it in so that they could get paid in the end. So you got to check for those kinds of things. So in that case, it's just a credibility check that we were doing through kind of statistical analysis. Yep.
How have you handled? I've seen kind of a fundamental divide between what people think that they want versus what they actually use. Features that people were super excited about beforehand, and then you have a 2% adoption rates.
Yeah.
How have you handled that?
Well, I hate to defer to this again, but if you've built it with them, that you're far less likely to have that problem. It is a bit of asking the wrong questions, which is, do you think you're going to use this in the future? Is not the right question to ask if you're trying to launch something new. You actually have to piece together their life and find a gap or a need that's not satisfied, as opposed to asking them whether they might want something in the future. Because generally people like to please you when you're asking those kinds of questions and you get a distorted answer, or they just don't know and they just guess, and that's not a good way to kind of build it. The other way, more technical way, is you build prototypes and you launch them out and you see whether they work or not. And that's kind of real testing. But the more abstract the question and the longer it is in the future, the more difficult it is for them to be able to figure it out. Yeah.
Let's say there is a topic where there's not a lot of foundational knowledge, something complex where it could be new technology, new type of, say, social media platform, or a piece of equipment, or even a new public policy issue. What types of techniques are you familiar with as a qualitative researcher to help your groups build ideas and how to improve the item for discussion or a product where the group doesn't have any knowledge of the idea or anything in question?
The basketball idea the basketball methodology I just told you about is incredible at building new concepts, even if you're trying to, because you don't have to hire basketball players every time, by the way, but you by even getting your team to go and do that. One is to figure out who might be, you could also hypothesize about who might the target be for that new product or new social policy initiative. If you're not sure, then pick several and get people from each one of those places to help you build it. I'll use a current example with Youthful Cities. We're working on a project in the US in 4 cities, and the sort of somewhat ethereal question that's being posed is that our client wants to build more open cities. Now, what's an open city in your mind? What does that mean to you?
Parks, green spaces.
What's that?
Parks and green spaces.
Parks and green space. What's it mean?
I was going to say one interpretation could be available data, where it's very easy to understand how the city's functioning.
Yeah.
And you
What
can
else?
access one's own data as you interact with components of city departments.
What else might be an open?
Transportation.
Transportation might make a city open. What else? Diverse. Yeah. Welcoming. Yeah. Anything else?
Hours of operation.
the what? The hours of operation, like how open, literally open versus closed it is. The right there, and our client knows this, it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So how do we know we want to end with this concept of open cities. So we're just in the recruitment process right now to find 4 or 5 people in each of these 4 cities around the US, and we're going to turn them into investigators. And we're going to say, you know, maybe it means inclusiveness. So let's go and look at kind of the diversity of the city. Maybe it means openness from a public policy standpoint, which could mean data, it could mean, you know, to new ideas. Maybe it means open architecture. Maybe it, you know, there's all kinds of things. So let's go and let's create teams who are in the city and may have a perspective on openness and get them to go deeper into that. Then we bring them back together. And then the nice thing about that kind of accordion process in a way is that that group who goes out and investigates and does those interviews and talks to those people, they come back so energized about and knowledgeable beyond themselves and able to contribute to generating new concepts, new ideas, new programs. And so it's in fact the second stage of that basketball project is to keep those guys who've just gone out and done the research on basketball to help the client create the new basketball strategy, because they're, you know, they already know about it. Like, and they feel like they want to solve the problems they heard about in those interviews, or in a public policy in the open kind of cities area. We're bringing people together. They're going to learn about open cities, and then we're going to say, okay, now let's figure out how do we create more open cities. And again, they'll be kind of steeped in their knowledge around that.
Thank you.
Good question.
Looks like you got a lot better at math than you were when you first.
Not no. That's what Excel's about. But yeah.
I was wondering if you got better at that, then how did that happen? Obviously, you got better.
No, I just got good at hiring people who were better
That answers my question.
than me. Yeah, that's always the goal. I think, you know, it does fit into this a little bit too, is like I know the things I'm good at and I know the things I'm not. And you know, I learned early on that what I was really loved doing was building these teams of people to come in, and there was other things that I was not good at, and it was just a question of finding, you know, I couldn't build that massive sheet that we use to score the Youthful Cities Index. Like it's in my brain is really difficult to figure out how everything matches up. And I look at Matt, who does it in our office, and I kind of look at him every day and I say, can I trust this? And he says, yes. And I say, good, because I can't go through all the details to figure out whether I can or not. The other thing though, just using that as an example, is like I went and collected some of the data so that I know what it takes to, one of the things that we collect in the index is the number of cinema seats in a city per capita. So that means if there's a lot of cinema seats, then it's likely the city has more cinemas and more films, and that means it's a city that has a more more film culture, movie culture to it. So turns out it's not that easy to figure out how many cinema seats there are in a city, but it was an important indicator for us. And so here I was looking through databases and trying to fill gaps in places around the world, trying to figure out whether we can get that data. So I think for me it was important to, you know, when we do the interviews with even our 18-year-old basketball players, sometimes I'll go out and I'll sit down with them, or I'll do those interviews just to make sure that I keep learning about each of the processes that I'm kind of creating. Yeah.
How do you build quantifiable metrics around qualitative data, or do you tend to just use ones that you can measure in terms of numbers?
I think the technical answer is if you do 10 focus groups or 10 groups with 10 people, that's 100 people. And if they're randomly selected in your answer and you're asking the same questions to that group, that's a viable plus or minus 10% kind of sample. If you ask them all the same question, do you like green or do you like blue? And most of them said green, you can feel pretty good that green's the right answer. Well, there's no such thing as absolutes. If you asked 1,000 people, you might feel better about that, but still an error that comes up. So that's kind of the easy answer to the question. I think we actually, I was in with another company today, and what we've built we built an advisory board for them that includes 20 people from across Canada, and they're launching a new technology product. And we brought together this 20 people, and they showed them a part of the platform. And sort of this is the way the story goes, but on one side, you sort of visualize what a screen looks like, and those who built websites before. On one side of the screen, there was a series of widgets which were supposed to solve problems for people like the 20 people in the room. And to a T, every one of them said, I would never use that. Now, they were recruited from across Canada, and they were reasonably diverse. There's no such thing as representative with 20 people in a room, but every single one of them said, I would never use that. So the client said, okay, we'll scrap it. They didn't go out and ask for 1,000 people, but if 20 people all say they're not going to use it, and they're from all across the country, and they're reasonably diverse, it's pretty, that's enough for us to do it. So we do things like some, half, most in those qualitative settings, just to give you a direction that you might want to investigate further. Rarely, this was a kind of crazy instance. Sometimes it's all. Yep.
In your first year of doing the survey, what was something that you found out or discovered about Toronto that you didn't know before that you were kind of proud of?
Another one of my favorite indicators was the number of nationalities that have at least one restaurant in the city. So we had a list of whatever that number, I think it's like 160 plus, maybe it's more, I would call it 160 nationalities in the world. And then we had to go and find a restaurant from, everyone did in all the cities we worked in, a restaurant, at least one restaurant. A guy who was visiting from Estonia who I was meeting the other day, and he said, I said, where do you want to go for dinner? He said, well, there's not going to be an Estonian restaurant in Toronto. And I pulled up the database, and lo and behold, there's one Estonian restaurant in Toronto. So Toronto won that indicator. So it has the most nationalities represented in restaurants in the world, which is cool. It also, which is, if you're into public policy, by a mile, Toronto allows people to vote in more languages. So I think it's 21 languages, and the next closest city is about 12 or 13 languages. So that was also another one I was proud of.
Trying to find a restaurant in each of the cities, like you would think it's nobody would think of that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
How do you see, so kind of, it sounds like a lot of the stuff that you've done, kind of collection data on, and kind of the analysis of it is smaller data sets. Maybe kind of talking about all these cities in the world, it's still kind of relatively a small data set. How do you see, big data as an entity kind of changing that, influencing this, looking at smaller groups?
It's a great question that I'm still grappling with myself. My kind of line lately is good data versus big data. And I think like what we create at Youthful Cities is good data, because I know where it's coming from. I know what's behind it. And the challenge with big data is so much of it is completely irrelevant. It's how do you sift through to find the stuff that is relevant? And there are smarter people than me, for sure, that are able to extract that, and data scientists who are looking at it. And I think openness in cities, open data, and allowing you to open up those data sources so that we can learn for that. Managing traffic in the city is a big data problem, and clearly they're trying to use that data. I love big data because it tells me which route to take now when I'm driving, because that's all big data. Yeah. So I can see the usefulness of it. I guess I've spent also a lot of time spinning my wheels, not knowing exactly how to use all this stuff to benefit where I'm going. So it might be just timing for me and the work that and other people that I'm working with to figure out how to use it. But I think we'll catch up to it or whatever in the next year or two and figure out the right ways to aggregate that data.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah.
So when you're converting indicators into scores,
yeah,
I can imagine some of it is a little bit mathematical but not too hard, and maybe other parts are PhD level. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, we kind of went back and forth on. It was actually the Financial Times who ended up kind of recommending the right scoring system, or not. There's no such thing as right, but the scoring system we ended up choosing, and it is an indexed one. So I mentioned the last call, and the best city in the world gets 100 points, and then everyone else is indexed based on how close they were to that city, and that's just that isn't just a basic formula to get you the index data. And so you basically, the best city in the world, the last city gets 0, and then everyone else is indexed between them and gets a point out of 100 being the best and 0 being the worst. And then you adding up all your points per 100 indicators to give you a final score, which then is tallied up for the index. So I don't think it's and we opened up our methodology completely for, the economists, for example, never does that. There's a black box about how they get to their answers. We said, we want to open it up. We've got no problems. And if someone's got a better idea how to do it, we'd want to hear about it because we want to get better.
A couple of things. First of all, say the subway stops at 3 a.m. instead of 2 a.m.
Yeah.
That might be important if the club's closed at 2. But if it closes at 5 a.m. instead of 4 a.m., that's not important at all.
Yeah. Well, we've even looked at, for example, safety and last call, whether there's a correlation between, crime and cities that have a later last call and whether it's, whether that matters. But yeah, it does seem ridiculous that in some places they close, subways close before the bars close, which creates problems for lots of people. So.
Do you want to avoid having custom indexes to avoid the possibility of bias?
What do you mean, custom indexes?
Like I'm saying, in the subway, you can create a scoring system that creating it manually based on how important it is. Then deciding exactly how that works,
well, yeah, there's going to be biases no matter what. Even the way we create the indicators could be conceived as bias. The goal is to get as many people involved from as many places, more as representative as possible to help us build that. So I think I feel good about the 100 that we've got as a good way to measure a city from a kind of youth perspective. I'm not sure this is what you're asking, but I'll answer it in the best way I can. You're right, like what's more important to you, just put up your hand, what's more important to you, like safety or music? How many people would say safety?
How good's the music?
Pretty good, I don't know. So, funny enough, that's basically what everyone else in the world said, is they rank safety ahead of music. But so the potential bias is, I actually love music, and I would say I don't care about safety, because if it's good music, then I'll go for the music, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe I would say, well, I would put music much higher than safety. So back to our 15,000 people that we interviewed around the world, we said, here's the 20 things that matter in cities according to other youth that we talked to. Why don't you just rate them out of a 1 to 10 scale as to how important it is for you? And then now we have a score that says, we already know that safety is an 8.3 out of 10, and it happens to rank highest in the world as far as the thing that's most important to young people in cities. Music comes in around numbers 15 out of 20. Still important, it's more like a 7.6, but it's not as important as safety, which is up here. And so those, I'm getting into technical terms, but for those who know the stuff, that becomes our weighting. So the city that scored 100 points on the transit is actually multiplied by the weight for transit, which gives us an unbiased view of transit as how important that score was for that kind of transit member. But happy to go through the other pieces of how we tried to mitigate as much bias as possible. Yeah.
Thanks. I used to work